Hi all. Afi and I just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys for your ongoing support with our new podcast. We appreciate all of you that tuned in to our last one. If anyone has any comments on the last one or any suggestions for future podcasts, please do email us. You can find our email on our website. We appreciate your ongoing support.
Thank you all. And Erin and I would also wholeheartedly like to thank Matt Martivi, our audiovisual editor, for being the backbone behind the videos. We would also like to thank our editor-in-chief, Denise Korn, as well as our team member, Lex Coop, for all the moral support. Thank you all, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have Dr. Yadi Baez Lockard with us. Dr. Lockard serves as a consultant and an expert witness for military court proceedings. She has consulted and testified regarding sexual assault, pornography possession cases, memory and substance use, as well as physical abuse for years. She served as a consultant for both the government and as a defense trial counsel. As a forensic psychologist, Dr. Lockard has been designated as an expert witness by several courts, and as an expert, she has traveled throughout the US, Canada, Central Asia, South America, Mexico, as well as the Caribbean. We welcome you, Doctor.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So again, thank you, Doctor, for participating today. Let's begin with some questions. For our listeners out there who may not know about you or have really read up on the cases, could you please shed a little bit of light on your background and how you ended up in this field?
Yeah, so I started working within the mental health field, but I started really working with the family courts and working with the Department of Social Services, and that was my first involvement within the forensic psychology field. And from there, I continued to have cases that were related to sexual assault, as well as dealing with both the perpetrators and the victims. And as part of my residency, I did it within the prison system, and my rotations were with sex offenders, as well as the substance abuse area. And from there, just continue on to have additional cases that were related to, again, sexual assault, alcohol use, as well as drugs, into the military, as well as outside of the military.
So in regards to the MeToo movement, it's really taken off globally, and it's taken on a life of its own, if you will. The world has watched as a number of high-profile characters have been brought to legal justice. What are the ramifications of this worldwide from a psychological perspective?
Yeah, the Me Too movement has significantly affected, in sometimes we can say negative ways and positive ways as well. In so many ways, the women are experiencing it feeling confident, feeling healthy, full of energy to be able to say, I feel like my voice is going to be heard. I feel like I can go out and make a report and feel like something's going to happen. So those are some of the positive things that we've seen. On the other side, some of the negative emotion as a result, you deal with a lot of anger. And at the same time, for a lot of these women and men as well, it's reliving this trauma. And each and every time that they have to retell their story, it is reliving. So it's what we call re-victimization. So the person is just experiencing these flashbacks, these memories of the events all over again.
Right. I can imagine that being very traumatizing. Okay, well, on to more specifically about the work you're doing. Why do you think that the number of sexual assault cases in the military has increased by nearly 40% between 2016 to today?
Yeah, so within the military, there has been some changes. So in 2016, there were some administrative procedures that were adopted. And what this meant that it was ensuring the commanders and those investigating, they were taking allegations of sexual assault seriously. Then in 2019, there were several changes that were made to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that was to increase like victims' rights. So the whole idea behind it was we need to be able to encourage those individuals that are victims to report it to their commanding officers, and for these assaults to be taken seriously. So then that increased a lot of the reporting. However, it's still nowhere near to where it should be.
Right. So from the perspective of this movement in the military, how do you think the survivors can actually really strike a balance while ensuring that their due process rights can be exercised? Are they really able to exercise their due process rights on a mental and physical level?
It comes down to them to feel like they have that level of support, that they have a good advocates for them, people that are able to encourage them to be able to go and report this abuse, to be able to request for transfers into other bases if they're being, if the perpetrator is within the same base. So it's being able to find that ability to feel and believe that the military is going to take action against it, and for them to be able to say, I'm being provided with the services with mental health counselors and victim advocates for them to continue, whether it is in the service or just to continue to just daily life.
Right, right. And that can get hard really many times. As a psychologist, what is your opinion on the good soldier defense? Do you think that should hold any value in the MeToo cases? Because obviously this allows a person to present their general character as a defense.
Yeah, so the good soldier, it's a defense that it's used to an accused service member, introduction of evidence, right? As a good military character, pretty much as a way to convince, and many times the military judge or jury. At the same time, could it be used in a way that could help the individual's case? It could be. At the same time, you could say that if somebody has a past of engaging in negative act, that could they use that as well? So it comes back to the idea of the propensity evidence, which is the evidence that is offered to prove, right, that because the defendant tended to act a certain way in the past, he or she will probably acted in that way in committing or not committing an alleged crime. So in so many ways, do I agree or do I not agree with it? I think that is something that does need to be introduced, and it is introduced in every single one of my cases. I don't know if it makes that big of a difference, but again, I haven't really spent the time to sit down with the jurors to see what influence does it have on their acquittal, if anything.
Right. And, of course, something like this impacts any survivor's mental health to a very, very large extent. As a psychologist, how can you ensure that they can stand back up on their feet and serve the nation?
It comes down to having that very strong support system for every single one of these servicemen and women to reach out to the victim advocates, to be able to, even as a civilian, to be able to have the resources and connect with the right people so they can have these really this level of support, and to feel like if they want to be able to serve the nation, that they should be able to do so without feeling threatened and without feeling like they won't have that support system from others.
Okay. In your opinion, why is the military struggling to get a handle on sexual violence, or why has it in the past?
It's interesting if you look at the research as to the people that joined the military and some of the potential factors, and unfortunately there isn't a lot of research regarding this, but people that tend to join the military, if we look at factors such as like demographics, they tend to be young, single, typical male, lower ranking personnel. And then you look into what are the recruiting, like the self-selection. A lot of these individuals tend to have a high prevalence of pre-military sexual trauma. And they also tend to volunteer for the military to escape difficult life circumstances. I'm sure that one of us have heard at one point or another, I wanted to get out of my house because there were so many issues going on in the home. So just the pre-military life tends to be very, starts with violence. There's, like I said, a lot of trauma in the past. And then on top of that, you add the military lifestyle and culture when it comes to things like heavy drinking, co-ed barracks, and hostile attitude towards women. When you add all of that, in so many ways, when you ask anybody within the military, they would say, hey, we can do all the training, we can try everything in our power, but then you have all these other factors that there's really not a whole lot that the military can do about it other than to really screen them. And if you screen them and ask them questions such as, have you ever been a victim of sexual trauma? Let's say the individual says yes, then does that mean that I can't accept you in the military? Because then that does increase the chances of you doing that to somebody else in the military. Right. It's like a typical sex offender. If you look into, which is what I do on most days, sexually violent predators in the state of South Carolina, if you look at their demographics, the majority of them have had a history of sexual trauma. So then that just increases the likelihood that they will do it to somebody else. And I'm not sure if there's anything that really the military can do other than potentially ask them these questions. But then again, does that mean that we are then putting a target in their back as well as they're entering the military?
Right. That's extremely interesting considering their background and why they might have enlisted in the military to begin with how that would affect them inside the service. So that kind of relates to my next question, which is 1 in 3 victims believe that reporting sexual assault would hurt their career. So considering that, the importance of their background, why they might have joined, are there any other factors that you might contribute to that?
Yeah, for a lot of times, typically in over 64% of the cases, there's some level of alcohol or substance use. So let's say as a female, I go ahead and I'm intoxicated. So, and let's say that I'm within my own group and things happen as it's usually referred to, then I feel like I'm going to blame myself. Then as someone who was drinking, I may feel ashamed. I may feel confused. And in so many ways, they feel powerless. So what happens a lot of the times is they feel like if I say something and everybody else noticed that I was drinking, then they're going to say, how do you know that you didn't want it, that you didn't welcome it? And then that does play a huge role into why it is in so many ways that they will not really report it. On top of that, you're dealing also with the chain of command as well.
So of the women who reported a sexual assault and rape, 59% were assaulted by someone in a higher rank, like you were just kind of commenting on, and 24% were assaulted by someone in their chain of command. Why might this be true, and why do the majority of these cases go unreported due to this?
You know, it's interesting because when you think about the unit overall, the commanders are the ones that set the climate in their units. So if a commander does not take it seriously, then that just sets the atmosphere for that entire unit. And interesting enough, in 2013, there was a legislation that passed that made it mandatory for all of the new as well as prospective commanders for them to go through very specific training and to make sure that they were responsible and took their position as a higher commanding individual, that this was something that was very, very important for them. But then again, when you're dealing with that chain of command, that's when you are dealing with a lot of the issues as to why it is that men and women both do not really want to report it as well. You know, the way that the chain of command works is it just goes down the orders, right? So it goes similar to like what we would say with the military, the highest in the branch is the president. So when crimes happen in the military, they have to report it through that chain of command. So that means that that individual will report the crime to their superior officer, or what we also call the commanding officer. Then from there, that will go to the superior officer, who is then to order a full investigation into the crime. So if I'm reporting this to my commanding officer, but my commanding officer is the person who is the person engaging in the sexual act, what are the chances of me wanting to report that if I know it's going to cause more of an issue? And potentially, who knows how that's going to affect my career in the military.
Right. Talking about bias, doctor, in a recent case, the U.S. versus Vargas, a defense-oriented judge was removed primarily because they thought that he or she would be having a biased approach against sexual assault. Why would the Air Force allow something like this to happen? And can such decisions have a mental impact on the survivors?
Yeah, in that case, when we think about it, was like the prosecutors, they, at that time, they did not want the judge to be assigned to the case because he had previously ruled in favor of other defendants accused of sexual misconduct, right? Even though that they stated there was evidence that was insufficient of guilt. So when that judge then makes the rulings, they had the concerns of they could have been some kind of conspiracy behind closed to get the judge, to be able to say there's corrupted, and the judge was just not wanting to deal with this misconduct. The issue comes down to when you deal with the government, whether you're dealing with the government or with the defense counsel, you can provide as much evidence as possible as you can imagine. But again, a lot of the times, a lot of this information that is provided, it's not even cleared. So then at that point, then it feels like, hey, we're just going to remove this individual. And really, it becomes more of an elaborate scheme. And then we would say, why would the military allow that? But again, when there's so many issues coming from both ends, then it puts them in a position of, where do we go from here? There were concerns that he may have not convicted Vargas at that time. So so we just want to let him go because of overseeing sexual assault cases. But again, it also says he was fine in all other cases. So it's like, it becomes an issue. So whether or not we agree or why the military is allowing it to do it, it's more as to the extent of the case. And it's a lot of political red tape in many ways.
Right. Doctor, often in these trials, we see that attorneys really question the overall validity of a survivor's claims. What are your thoughts of on the implications of such statements?
We do run a lot into this. As I mentioned, I work with both with the defense and with the government as well. And the idea of the validity of the allegations does come up in just about every single case. And when I take on a case, I look at all the information, and before I say, yes, I'm okay with taking that case, or I'm not okay. And in some instances, when I have taken it with the defense, it's related to the information that is available. And I'm not questioning the validity of what actually happened, but that there isn't sufficient information to be able to say, yes, that individual committed that specific offense. So I just communicating with my attorneys, it's not a matter of they question how valid are those claims, it's whether or not there's sufficient information to be able to then state, yes, this happened or this didn't happen. And then when you're also thinking about the reliance on like medical examinations versus like multiple data sources, that causes an issue on its own. If we don't have any medical information as well, we don't have witnesses report, then it becomes a he or she said, which again, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but unfortunately, if you don't have enough of that, then it's what most people don't want to hear, then the case ends up being dismissed.
Right. Women in the military have been saying that in response to the recent specialist Julian's killing in Central Texas, the women are saying that their response is their MeToo movement, and it really prompts them to examine the racial inequities in the service. What are your thoughts on racial inequities in the service, and what's the psychological impact of that on the survivors?
There is a significant amount of racial inequalities really within the military. And what's interesting is that if you look into research, there really is not even any guidance in recognizing even the incidence of racism, discrimination, even within the military and even outside of the military, and doesn't really provide them much guidance into how to address these specific effects that race has, as well as the psychological distress. And in many ways, traumatic injury. It's easy for someone to say, I witnessed this, and as a result, I suffered this, and we're going to diagnose it with PTSD. So it's cut and clear. But when it comes to racism, there hasn't been really much of any literature in regards to if I'm experiencing this specific incident regarding racism, how that affects my psychological my mental health overall, my traumatization from it, my fears, my anxieties, everything that comes from all of those experiences. And then you see that in cases like what happened in Central Texas, and that was completely not equal in any shape or form, that it's just allowing other people to really question kind of like, where do we go from here? What can we do about it? Because minorities are being affected in a very different way than other groups, and it's not really being addressed within the military. We're addressing sexual assault, but we haven't really addressed much of even sexual assault in minorities as well.
So in regards to these survivors, what resources are offered to them when they initially speak out or seek help?
Yeah, so they pretty much have two options. They can report it in an unrestricted or restricted basis. So the unrestricted reporting gives them the option to initiate a criminal investigation. So command, law enforcement, they're provided details of really the incident, whereas in an unrestricted report of sexual assault, they will have additional access to healthcare. They can ask for protective orders, transfer, avoid having contact with the accused. They can also have expedited transfers as well. And on top of that, they also reach out to the victims' advocates. They are the ones that are responsible for connecting the victim with appropriate resources, services. They assist them with the reporting process, concerns of physical safety. And I would say that out of every single one of my cases, I take high respect for these individuals. They are extremely caring. They sit throughout the entire court hearing. They are helping and providing as much support to the victims. And they really do an amazing and phenomenal job with the victims, for sure.
I was reading an op-ed recently in which the military was kind of referred to as a breeding ground for this sort of behavior and sexual misconduct. What in particular about this environment, the environment of the armed forces, may cause these assaults to be a little bit more prevalent than outside of them?
Yeah, if you have much experience talking with a lot of the military personnel, especially the ones that are deployed, they are with each other nearly 24/7. It's like its own family. So they are spending so much time with each other that even though that they may have not felt attracted to someone, now because they're spending so much time with them, now they're starting to feel attracted. That happens even outside of the military. So whether or not it's really a breeding ground, I think it's more related of we spend so much time with one another. We share so much of our lives with these individuals that we start having these special connections within our groups. And that causes a lot of sexual type of relationships. Some of them are consensual, some of them are not. And I feel in so many ways, especially for the ones that are or that have been deployed, where it becomes more of a human need, I feel, in so many ways for them to be able to have that sexual contact. And if they're not getting it, then most of the time they're not thinking clearly when there's alcohol involved, and it ends up being with sexual misconduct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, going forward, how might the armed forces better prepare for these survivors, both before the assault in question or after?
Yeah, there's really been several things that they have recommended throughout the years, having like stiff rules against like sex-based bias, making sure that the commanders are able to uphold these rules, or if not, for them to face dismissal. A lot of the times they don't. Something that has come up throughout the years, having more women in leadership positions. There's still a significant difference between men and women. And Perhaps if we were to have more women in leadership positions, we won't have this as much. Purging sexually offensive material from the workplace. If you talk to a lot of the servicemen, they will tell you even some of their language, it's offensive. The way that they refer to specific things that we don't even say outside of the military is extremely sexually related. There's been a time that they was suggested to do some type of bystander intervention training. So if we are not only training everyone that's within the military, but also saying, hey, as a bystander, meaning let's say you are out drinking and one person is not drinking as much as the other, or the designated driver. So do some type of intervention training where we can say, hey, if you notice this, I need you to go this and to do this and this to keep everybody safe. To also be able to do some type of specialized training that includes things like interviewing skills, to increase like trust and disclosure for victims. So victims don't feel intimidated or even shut down victims. Even skills that can incorporate neuroscience research into the impact of trauma on memory, all of that, which is why we become as experts for the court martials. It's because we are educating the panel, we're educating the court as to what are some of the reasons why this or that could have happened. Which is great that we're able to do that. However, if we're able to start that from the moment that that person goes into basic training, I think in so many ways it could really safeguard a lot of these victims and potentially really prevent a lot of this.
Right. Talking about education, there are really no proper military sexual violence training courses within the forces. Do you think the reason behind that is really buried within the ambits of our society that the military really is trying to actually protect?
Well, they are some trainings that the military conducts for not only for the commanding officers, but also for anybody really coming in. There's been some issues with how we define sexual assault versus sexual harassment and what to do. So they are trainings as to what to do. I think it will be more, if anything, I think it will be more of being able to specify what specific type of training are we really referring to. So when we say sexual violence, are we asking about what constitutes sexual assault, what doesn't, what's the policy, what are they supposed to do? Because I mean, at the end, there really is training. It's whether or not that training it's being utilized, and perhaps I think in so many ways sinking in. You know, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people just sit through these trainings and just dismiss them instead of really paying attention and being able to perhaps I would suggest every year, every so many years to be able to go through this training again. And that, unfortunately, I do not know if they do get to go through this training more than once, but I think that will definitely be very important.
Recently, the Marine Corps has also been widely criticized for being unable to tackle problems pertaining to sexual assault within the military. Do you think this is somehow related to the Department of Defense's reactive approach?
I think that when it comes to that specific branch, there's just been a lot of increase in reporting when you compare it to the other branches. I know that they have been criticized as to be able to really not tackle this, but I think that this just really applies to all of the branches as to what is the really underlying issue to it. In so many ways, yes, it is a reactive approach instead of trying to be more proactive. But again, it comes down to, as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of these demographic, a lot of these factors that are not even being addressed. So in so many ways, when there is a sexual assault, we're reacting to it versus trying to, whether it's the Marines or the Air Force or whichever branch it is, to be able to tackle these things from the beginning before they start. So then we don't have to just go from that reactive approach.
Right. Finally, doctor, what advice do you have for the members in the service? How should they tackle matters if they're attacked sexually, or, they're in a dilemma about reporting such attacks?
It's a matter of having, again, be able to communicate with family members, as well as with even individuals in their own unit, and to be able to just talk about it with someone, and to make sure that they have that really support system. So I would definitely say for every members in the service, men and women, that they do need to be able to, instead of doubting themselves, for them to be able to communicate with other people and say, am I looking at this clearly? Because you do have a lot of anxiety and paranoia for a lot of the victims. So if we just really keep it to ourselves, it's really worse for us. So we need to be able to chat with other people, communicate with other people, and seek those resources, because in the long term, it's worse for men and women to just not really ever communicate it with anyone, and then additional incidents continue to happen, even if they're small nature, because once you've been subjected to that level of that experience of that traumatic event, then any events thereafter, it just becomes an accumulation of it, and it's really worse for them. So I would definitely say for them to be able to communicate with others, and if needs to be, then for them to be able to report it.
Afi and I want to thank you for joining us today, Doctor. It's been such an informative and enlightening podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you to all of our viewers who are watching this as well and supporting the Current Affairs Times.
Thank you all. Thank you.